Hi everyone, thank you so much for joining me. Um, as promised, I said I was going to share my story from the age of 5 and give you a bit of a history of my background. But first of all, I just want to say a very big thank you to all the people that sent me lovely messages of support and encouragement when they watched my first two YouTubes that went out last Friday and the Friday before. Thank you so much. I really appreciate all your support. Um, just to give you a bit of a background of my life, first of all. My mother was a travelling lady. She was what they called a land girl, and she came from a big family, and she was travelling around a lot. I think sometimes she was probably sleeping in bales after the war, etc. But when she met my father, who had been a merchant seaman, they, settled down, got married, and obviously my mother hadn't really lived in a solid house up until then, and because she was travelling around, but she got married and settled down, and they had a reasonable marriage from what I can remember. There were 5 of us, and siblings. I had an older sister, an older brother, and 2 younger brothers, and I was kind of in the middle. But I'll tell you more about them as I go along, because they will be part of my story. When should I say, Christmas Day 1958, this is when my life started to go downhill, the age of 5. I remember coming down the stairs Christmas morning, and I don't really remember my brothers and sisters. They were obviously there, but being 5 years old, the most prominent thought in my head, as of today and back then, was that of my mother, who was sat in a chair with members of my extended family, aunties and uncles, comforting her. And I remember that she was crying, really, really crying, and she was just staring with tears pouring down her face, staring at me, and she was obviously staring at all my brothers and sisters as well. But I can only remember her staring at me, and I remember that I had a present behind me, which I believe was a doll's crib with a dolly in it, and being 5 years old, normally you would be really, really interested in your presents on Christmas Day, because that's what kids do, don't they? They don't care about anything as long as they've got, their presents on Christmas Day. But I wasn't interested. I wasn't interested in that. I was only interested in why my mum was crying, because of a child at that age, it's trauma to see your parents cry, because you don't see your parents cry. You don't want to see your parents cry, because you look up to them, don't you? But my mum was a mess. She was an absolute mess, and I didn't know the reasons why. My father wasn't there, and nobody said where my dad was. But as I say, I've got this present, and I don't really remember playing with it, because all I could think about was my mum crying. And I don't really remember an awful lot after that day, but sometime later I heard that my mum couldn't deal with living at the house, because obviously it was some time later that I found out that my dad had been, killed unlawfully. He'd been stabbed, excuse me, and I obviously didn't find that out till much later, and obviously I had to go and investigate that myself when I became of age, where, you know, you take an interest in things like that. So I went and found the newspaper cuttings, and it turned out he had died by a knife wound to his stomach, and died on Christmas Day on the operating table. But going back to what happened not long after my, you know, that Christmas Day, I remember that we all moved house, and on the back of a lorry under some tarpaulin. It was all hidden because apparently, you know, it's against the law to do things like that. So it was all hushed up and told to be quiet. So we moved house, and I think one of my aunties was in the back with us, and we was all laying down on the back of this lorry, and she was keeping us all calm so nobody knew that we were there. Just to move house. Anyway, we all moved house. We left this lovely house that was a 3-bed, massive garden where my mum used to grow her own vegetables, and I remember playing in that garden. But we moved into a 3 up, 3 down house with a backyard and a toilet at the end of the garden, as they used to back in the day. And our bathroom was actually hanging outside. It was a tin bath, and that's what people did back then in the 50s. Excuse me. Excuse me. Ignore my posh drink. It's just water. And that we moved into this house, and I think a lot of our problems continued from there. We didn't have any light bulbs as such. It was a very difficult time because obviously, you know, the house was very ordinary. There was no mod cons as we'd been kind of used to in the other house, and apparently it was something that my mum needed to do. A lot of people feel that, you know, when you lose someone suddenly, you have to get away from the memories of the, you know, the whole old house, and I think that this must have been something that my mum wanted to do, but it was almost like we'd gone from good to bad in the house because the house wasn't very nice at all. You know, we had an old Belfast sink in the kitchen, and as I say, everything about it was old fashioned and dated. Going down the bottom of the garden at the age of 5 to go to the toilet wasn't easy. It was very, very scary. My mum made it as nice as she possibly could. The front room, which I suppose you'd call it the front parlour back in the day, my sister had the job of, my big sister had the job of cleaning that and keeping it nice. Nobody was allowed in there. My mum used to have a padlock on it so nobody'd go in. That was her best room of the house. Everything was beautiful. She had all her little trinkets and nice furniture in there and all the pictures, and I suppose she would entertain friends in there really, you know, and as I say, my sister was the one that would be cleaning it out on a regular basis. She thought it was great because she got the opportunity to go in there and clean it. We all had our own little jobs around the house. The rest of the house was very bland, you know. We had the old-fashioned beds, as they did back then. And we didn't have any hot water. We had just one tap. That was in the kitchen. We had an open fire. And as the years passed, I remember that I used to get up in the morning before school and clean out the fire grate and start building a fire. and my hands was filthy from scraping all the old coal out and the ashes, and I used to make the fire, and there we used to have all the clothes set out in the morning, and you'd see the steam coming off them because the bedrooms were so cold, and as you put the clothes around the fire, you'd see the steam coming off where they'd be drying and airing before you could get ready and go to school. And we had a lot of hand-me-downs then, you know. It was a really, really difficult time because, you know, my mum had gone through so much trauma. She obviously hadn't had it easy in her own life, and then of course losing my father the way she did must have been very, very difficult. That obviously caused her a lot of mental health problems, which is quite a common thing now, but back then you had no choice but just to get on with it, and it wasn't recognised as much back in those days as a mental health problem, you know, and sometimes you'd be classed as going mentally insane. So, you know, she just tried to get on with it the best she could. From what I remember, she did start to drink a little bit, my mum did. And we had a local pub in the same street we lived. And she would, as the years passed, she would go over there and have a drink, and my older sister would do the babysitting. My sister was a teenage, she'd be about 13 when my father died, and obviously now she's a young woman, and you know, when we moved out, became a young woman, teenage if you like still, and she had the job of doing a lot of cleaning, she had the job of babysitting us and picking up all the pieces. It must have been very, very difficult for my sister because, you know, she had a lot to worry about. We all had our own chores around the house, cleaning, tidying, and unfortunately at some point I started to wet the bed, as did one of my brothers. You know, I was a constant bedwetter. Obviously I was having to deal with what was going on. We all did. We had to deal with what was going on and not really being explained what was really going on, because back then you didn't, you know, you had to be seen and not heard. So you didn't get explained, you know, things didn't get explained to you very much. So, and then going to school was difficult. I think I do remember at some point going into some kind of home, although my sister denies that because she said I didn't go in a home, but I think my mum needed time to get over my father's death, and I remember being left at some home that I used to sleep in, and people would come round and view us, if you know what I mean. They'd look over the cot at us and almost feel sorry for us. And I think that was probably just for my mum to, you know, to help her through the experience that she went through with losing my dad. It must have been so difficult because it, you know, it was a big front page story in the Leicester Mercury back then in 1958. And how does a person move forward from that, you know? From what I know, that we were a close-knit family, but here we are, moved house into this completely different house, and fending for ourselves, really. You know, now that my father had disappeared, it became increasingly difficult for my mum, I suppose, you know, with the drinking. And she entertained friends in the best room of the house, and we'd have to go to bed really early. I remember, you know, it was scorching hot summer, and she'd buy us sweets, bags of sweets, and we'd be going bed early and playing games and eating sweets, all of us. You know, I suppose we was just out the way really, you know, while my mum entertained downstairs, lots of friends. But at some point, my mother got into a relationship with a chap, and I was about 9 years old, 8 or 9 years old. Memories are very vague. And this chap, he wasn't actually living with us. He would stay over certain days, and then he would, from what I remember, he would go back to his flat. But he kind of become my stepfather, if you like. He was very strict, and life became very difficult when he was around. He used to have some very bad habits, and my mum argued a lot with him. She would go to the pub. He would encourage us to go to the pub, and he would give her money to go and have a couple of drinks. He'd be left in the house with us, and we would all go to bed. And it was some time later that I realised that I was being removed from my bed in the middle of the night. My mum had obviously come home. She'd obviously had a few drinks. Sorry, I'm backtracking a bit now. She'd had a few drinks, obviously, so she would sleep really ever. But I remember waking up, finding myself, just to tell you now, just to pre-warn, in case, you know, I don't want to bring any sad memories up for anyone, but just to pre-warn you, if, you know, I'm not going to go into too many details because I don't want to hurt anyone's feelings or cause any bad memories for anyone. But what I'm about to tell you is might be upsetting, but I'll try not to go into too many details. As I said, you know, I must have been about 9 years old, and I remember waking up to finding myself being carried over someone's shoulder, and I would be carried down the stairs. Those days I only wore a vest for bed. I don't honestly remember wearing any pants, but I would be wearing a vest, and I'd be carried down the stairs over his shoulder. And in the living room, because the stairs led immediately to the living room, and I would then be abused. Without going into too many details, I was sexually abused, and he must have done this quite a few times, because I remember a few situations, and he would obviously carry me back to bed afterwards, and my mother never woke up, and I kind of hoped that she would, you know, the stairs door, because immediately where I was being abused, I could see the stairs door immediately in front of me, and I was kind of, as young as I was, 8 and 9 years old, I was hoping and praying that door would open and my mum would rescue me, but she never did. She never rescued me. And I don't remember, but obviously I was told to keep quiet. This happened a number of times. On some occasions, he would, my mum would be at the pub, and he would send my brothers and I don't know where my sister was, but my brothers, I think my sister must have been living in her own place at some point because she wasn't always there. But my brothers were, and my stepfather used to send them to the shop, and so that he could abuse me. But I obviously become wise to that and obviously ran out of the house and went with them. And when we all got back from the shop, I remember him telling me off. Why did I go to the shop? I shouldn't have gone to the shop. Obviously he wanted to get me on my own so he could abuse me. We also had a dartboard in the living room where my brothers would play darts, and he would distract them to play darts so he could abuse me over the other side of the sofa. I remember that. This obviously went on for a number of years, and this obviously traumatised me quite a lot because he wasn't the only one that abused me. But I will talk more about my other abuser in my next YouTube. I hope I haven't upset anyone. I do apologise if I have, but I really do want to get my story out there. I really want to reach out to as many people as possible because, you know, there's a lot of people out there that have been abused, that have been through domestic violence. They have, you know, they have been through some kind of dysfunctional childhood problems, issues, etc. And it just stops you in your tracks. You just can't live a normal life. You do become frozen in your mind and can't do the things that you would normally do. You can't move forward. You can't live a normal life. You can't have a normal education. You can't mix with other children. You can't, you can't work. You're affected by everything, and that's happened to you as a child. And I know how it feels. I know how it feels to miss out on so much life, and I want to help as many people as I possibly can, not, to stand tall and be able to rise above that. It is hard. Only someone that's coming out of it can look back in and see it for what it was. I'm a survivor, basically. I survived it. I got through it. It was really, really hard. I'll always be traumatised by my experiences as a child and as a young woman growing up. But I did get through, and I want to share that with everyone and help as many people as I possibly can. I'm not going to share any more of my story now because I think I've shared enough. But what I do want to mention is, if there's anyone out there that needs advice, needs support, needs help, please feel free to email me. Now, my email address has been included. Now, my email address has got my son, who I lost to suicide. He's got his first initial on my email address, which is now Millian. It's spelled Millian. millian.ward@outlook.com. Feel free to message me for advice, and I'll forward you any information to get advice, to get support, to help you. Please don't be afraid to reach out. It doesn't matter how small you feel your problems are. It doesn't matter if you think that you might have been through some kind of trauma. Please feel free to email me. I'm here to help. I really don't want anyone to suffer as I did all my life. I'm in my late 60s now, and it's only now that I'm able to stand tall and be strong and move forward in my life. Please, please, please listen to all my YouTubes, because I'm there to help. I want to share my story, even though it's going to be upsetting for a lot of people. Or if you know anyone that's suffered from the similar trauma to myself, There's so much I'm going to be sharing with you with regards to my son's suicide, my sexual abuse, domestic violence, so much that I want to share. Becoming separated from two of my beautiful children, which traumatised me terribly. Please subscribe and you'll get all my YouTubes then come up. Please like, please share as much as you can. Thank you so much for listening. I'm sorry that I rambled on. I'm not an experienced person. I'm telling my story straight from the heart. Thank you so much for listening. Please take care. Until next week. Bye bye for now.